18th century. So this is the precedent, and then you have these additions at the top to produce this blended form, right? You've got the, in Singapore you don't have these features, but in this mosque for the Tamil Muslim cemetery in Singapore, you have it. So you get all of these remarkable blendedness. You have other examples like this Malacca, in Pulau Pinang. This is the last remaining from the original form of Kapitan Keling. So the original form of Kapitan Keling resembled this kind of format with these parapet walls, these signature columns with the niches. These niches were covered. They were originally niches. There's an older photo. Don't know who decided to plaster all the niches. Should correct back the niches. Maybe they didn't like that people were stuffing things in there, because people tended to do that, right? In Singapore as well, wait, I sound like I'm throwing shade at, so Singapore as well, so Singapore is just as bad. So these used to have niches, and then they plastered it over. So it's not just Penang again, Singapore also, okay, don't scold me. So Singapore did the same problem, has the same issue. So it's quite bad that they covered this, because it's quite a feature, a recognizable feature. The last remaining one, the rest have all been demolished. This is the one that remains. I mean, some of you know this because you're very acquainted with that complex. Yeah? So just a quick review of Masjid Tengkara Besar, because it's the one with the model. Again, this is so interesting, right? Because this is a Chulia style minaret, and then it has these mustoko and sulur bayung, right? So even these fussy little details are important. But another important fussy little detail is the fact that the Chinese mason for this decided to do both. The Chinese mason decided, I will put a Chinese swallowtail ridge, and then I put the Malay sulur bayung in wood. So Masjid Tengkara is the best. It has both. I wrote about this a long time ago for a local journal that never circulated, because at that time I was still an undergrad. I was frustrated by the point that this is a Chinese building, right? I mean, yeah, it is, but it's the last layer of renovation. So it's got a swallowtail motif here, and then the Malay sulur bayung in wood. So you get both worlds. Yeah? Quite remarkable. And of course, coming back to that theme about the Trans-Oceanic. Yeah? So you've got Kampung Tengkara is not just, Kampung Tengkara is a satellite settlement, akin to Kasunyatan of Banten. So Banten had Kasunyatan. Malacca had Kampung Tengkara. Why Tengkara? Tengkara is the name Tranqueira, right? In Portuguese meant the walled town for what in the Sultanate period was called Upeh. Upeh is the merchant settlement. So then there was a wall. In the Malacca Sultanate period, there was no wall, but there was There were two parades. Parade Jawa, Parade Cina. Tells you how important the Javanese were. Parade Jawa and Parade Cina defended Upeh. But after that, the Portuguese were afraid of the number of attacks that they had from Bugis and Acehnese and others. So they built the Tranqueira, right? The wall. So this Kampung Tengkara is outside of the wall. It was a satellite town of sorts. So then, it's also a place where many of the indigenous traders lived. So you have this idea of Pengkulu Dagang, Melaka, dekat Kampung Tengkara. So it's not just an outlying town of no consequence. It was quite important in that sense. It was also a cosmopolitan place. Many of the Tamil Muslims who were already very localized way before Abdullah bin Abdul Qadir Munshi. This is way back. The Tamil Muslims who were already there from way back. Maybe some of them even date back to the Sultanate period. We do not know. But we know that many of the, and there are telltale signs, many of the Tengkara Malays are actually of Tamil Muslim descent. And one of the telltale names is the use of Tambi. Tambi is a Tamil word. Yeah? So it's a very interesting history. Anyway, so I just thought, one way to bring to social reality, bring to life the social reality of Tengkara. It's just this reference that Annabel T. Gallup posted online in the, her remarkable British Library blog series, right, which makes it publicly accessible to those of us who are not otherwise studying manuscripts. Very important source. But you have one more mystery. I've asked people on the ground in Malacca. Nobody really knows how, but I think we can find out, right? Why is it that actually there was an older minaret? So this is not the Masjid Tengkara minaret. This is another minaret. Somebody has told me, no, this is not the masjid. This is the surau. Okay, so that means more likely it's actually separate. This is not the original minaret. It is the other minaret in the area. It is the minaret of the surau that got demolished when the road was widened. So then the surau itself is gone, but the minaret of the surau. It's quite remarkable that a surau just a few hundred meters away from the masjid, you know, had a minaret. I mean, usually suraus don't have a minaret, but this one has a tall minaret. There might be a longer story to this. Might be that Surau Tengkera is the important older building, and then later superseded by a Masjid Tengkera with a minaret that somewhat resembles this older one. You can see the resemblances, except many of the details have all fallen off. One last Surau Bayung remaining there. I don't know whether it's still there. Can you see it? The rest are gone. Yeah, this one has everything. So you've got so many of these. I don't know, it looks abandoned. I hope something is being done about it. You have other elements in the Malacca tradition. You've got this minaret, which is also spiral staircase. But this, unlike the previous one, is not in the Chulia tradition. Okay, we'll hold that thought. And then you also have a gateway. This gateway is interesting because it's the gateway for the tabuh, yeah? The mosque drum, but it's the Sumatran form, not the Javanese form of baduk, which is a barrel drum. This one is a log, a hollowed out log with only one skin. So that's a tabuh. The Javanese model is the barrel drum with two skin sides, two skin surfaces. This one is only one skin surface and a log. So that's the tabuh, the Sumatran tradition, in its own entrance pavilion. So this is a typology that is missing in the other two mosques in the center of Malacca town. And of course, all of these structures bear the expected ornamentation that we are now very familiar with. Even the minaret has this little labu, a little bit funny. It looks more like a bowling pin, but it's supposed to be a labu. So this kind of minaret recalls the Hadramaut minarets. Now there's of course a question, so what is this? You know, is it really a Hadrami minaret? Well, we don't know, but it seems to be associated with whenever there is a Hadrami benefactor. Whenever a Hadramaut person is involved, as is the case here, right? The minaret had a Hadrami benefactor as well. I forgot to write the name, and I cannot right now recall the name of the Hadrami benefactor for Masjid Kampung Hulu's minaret. But they seem to have this family resemblance, a little bit distinct from Chulia minarets. Again, I'm very careful about pulling hairs, trying to make the distinction too firm, but you can kind of distinguish a little bit. There is such a thing as a Hadramaut minaret, usually with a square base with a crenellated corner, right? And then you also have a spiral staircase that's very distinct. It's all made in mud brick, yeah? And then a tapered cylindrical or octagonal form, depends, and then a domed top, usually. So roughly like that in mud brick, and you get somewhat similar forms in let's say Jakarta and 1760, right? The 18th century, right? The turning point, and then in Penang, and then of course you have the Kampung Hulu in Malacca, and you can kind of contrast or distinguish that fairly easily, I think, with the Chulia form. Again, this is difficult to say with much certainty. And then you have examples that throw you off completely, like Masjid Hajjah Fatima's minaret, which seems to try and resemble this in Malacca, very well known. Many of the minarets in Malacca take this form. It's like an enlarged version of the Chulia minaret, right? So the niche becomes full windows, but there will be these, kind of parapets, right? Corridors, which feature in many other minarets that resembles what is done here. It has a square base, so you've got all these question marks. Yeah, the square base, for example. This is the kind of minaret you see quite often in Malacca, and there is a kind of cousin resemblance to what possibly was the model the architect was supposed to follow in the case of Masjid Hajjah Fatimah. Masjid Hajjah Fatimah is important because, before I forget to mention it, Hajjah Fatimah is a Bugis merchant, but she came to Singapore from Malacca. Her husband also is from Malacca, and the foundation inscription, so far what we found, this is possibly the only mosque in Singapore with a foundation inscription in Jawi. In Arabic. It's in Arabic. It states her name, her husband's name, her name, and both of them are Al-Bugisi, they are Bugis, but we know that they came to Singapore from Malacca. And the scribe, right, who wrote, signed off at the end, he is somebody from Palembang. From Palembang. So you see how these are all connected. So Singapore is the young upstart, right? So of course somebody who is Bugis descent would have gone to Malacca first, not Singapore. And then the scribe came from Palembang. And then there are also other scribes in Singapore who came from Terengganu, because Terengganu is way older. So you've got all these multiple connections and the attempted translations Yeah? Of course, these were themselves translations from older Chulia forms, right? Themselves translations from this kind of form into the tall freestanding Malacca minaret, which is distinct. You don't have anything like this in Tamil Nadu, for sure. We don't have this kind of freestanding sole minaret built to accompany a mosque like that, with this kind of a roof form with sulur bayung and so on. So it becomes it becomes a Malacca tradition. So in summary, you've got this complex history waiting to be properly written out. Yeah, with more questions than answers at the moment because of lack of written documentation. I think we might have just a quick turn to end with Masjid Sultan and then with what do you call this? Masjid Sultan, to talk about Masjid Sultan and then to talk about Kampung Laut. Yeah? Just a quick one. So for Masjid Sultan, one of the interesting things that recent finding has unearthed, I was involved in the Bicentennial Book Project for the mosque. Mosque was founded in 1819, and as you can see, rather than 1824, it was expanded in 1824 using British East India Company funds. We have the written documents stating the 1819 date. So this is itself, in the Singapore context, quite, I wouldn't say earth-shattering, it was quite a surprise, a major surprise. So it seems that the original mosque in 1819 would have been the 3 tiers before the addition with brick for the 4th tier, the lowest veranda, which lacks sulur bayung, as you can see. And you know sulur bayung is like a must. All the mosques will have sulur bayung. And J.T. Thompson, the surveyor at the time, took the trouble to draw out all these details. Yeah? So it counted for something. His drawing was much later. What's important also is that it seems the mosque was expanded once before the current structure. So sometime around 1880s, it was enlarged. The details I can't go into, but if you do some measurements of the dimensions, reconstruct dimensions from these photographs, you get a height that seems considerably taller than this. I did a full reconstruction elsewhere, but also, of course, for the local context in Singapore, I would also have to show the same kind of comparisons, right? So to understand an example like this from Singapore, you might want to compare it with both the wooden as well as the brick versions and the kind of ornamentation that is similar to but differs from the example seen in all of these cases. So I hope that gives you a clean summary of let's say, looking at Singapore case in the regional context. So it's not just, you know, the translocal is equally important. Some of the details you can see here are truly remarkable. In this case, a base with its own sulur bayung in a kind of miniature roof form. That you then see also examples of in Malacca. We also have a really remarkable case of a surau over the water with these finials that resemble the example that we're going to look at next. But also the strip windows that resemble the example from Jami' Aitiris in Riau. So this is the kind of form that you see a lot in, let's say, houses of Pahang, just to pick a random example. So there's one particular tradition of windows of this strip form. In addition to windows of this more conventional form, right? You have this strip window that was used a lot in palaces as well as mosques. So you have an example from Singapore as well, the Kampung Kalang Rokok, Surau Prayer Hall, and this largely forgotten Royal Mosque in Kesultanan Langkat. So this kind of a strip window. Now, then you come to, so therefore looking at that, you come to Kampung Laut and you see a distinction. So Kampung Laut does not use the strip window. It uses instead a different kind of window. The structure is also different. So there are ways in which we can then start to distinguish details on all these examples. So the case from Kampung Laut is distinguished by a number of factors. The finial is shaped quite differently from the Malacca tradition. There is the use of these prominent brackets. The brackets themselves raise questions. So are they more, let's say, northeastern, right? Pantai Timur, Greater Patani feature? Is that a way to look at it? The other puzzle is, you see, in this part of the peninsula, more of the mosques have the balai, the elongated rectangular balai form. But Kampung Laut, is a special settlement. So it's a kind of, Kampung Laut has its own distinct history. It was actually a settlement that was oriented more to trade and to market activities, a commodities market and so on. And it was almost an independent economic center that operated despite shifts in palace. Right? So Kampung Laut therefore presents an interesting case, because then this mosque is not built by a polity, but built by a community of merchants and artisans and so on. So it becomes, even the actual date is uncertain. There has been an attempt to reconstruct, right, the earlier forms with tentative dates. So that itself is a starting point. So Masjid Kampung Laut presents yet another set of enigmas. But what's interesting is the local tradition preserves the name Balai Lintang, which is an important nomenclature kind of record, because otherwise, this idea of Balai Lintang actually is important because it comes from the notion of space reckoning, because of the direction of prayer in this way, and the roof ridge of this Balai Lintang cutting perpendicular to it. So this idea of perpendicular or lintang, right? And it's called a Balai Lintang. But more importantly, Balai Lintang like this is also usually named in relation to a form that is the typical form for northeastern peninsula. So more mosques in the northeast peninsula take the form of this or this. And so then to call the hall in front Balai Lintang makes a lot of sense, because the main hall is that way and this melintang, this is perpendicular to it. You still use Balai Lintang here, but there's not much of a lintang in the form, because this is concentric. But if you look at these kinds of forms, then a pavilion in front with a ridge perpendicular to the main one is the Balai Lintang form. And you have Wayne Boga writing in 1992 saying, discussing the examples from Patani, and in particular looking at Surah Aur. Some of you are familiar with this article. He made a lot of important conjectures that await further study. So yeah, so he talked about the mosque form of the northeastern region. What he says is resembling the vihara form, right? Or the prayer hall form used for Buddhist ritual. Yeah, so the complication of this is that the vihara form in Java and the peninsula itself derived from forms that were local to the region rather than from India. So for example, this is a form that you see on Borobudur relief panels, not because it's from India, but because in Java, these non-Indic forms continued to be important to the Javanese temple complex. So putting together of forms from different origins. In Java, this kind of roof form, which is considered by some to be Austronesian, Roxana Watterson, for example, asserts that this is Austronesian. She asserts that, and then this kind of form is usually regarded in Java at the time to be connected to the rice cult. And so rice cult via Dewi Shri is connected to Vishnu. And so then in Java only, but not in India, because this kind of form was connected to granary for rice, right? Tempat menyimpan padi. It's connected to the wife of Vishnu that then makes it suitable for a Vishnu prayer hall. Does that make sense? Huh? So it doesn't come from India. It's actually a local understanding of how this becomes relevant to Vishnu worship. So there's a complication to the fact that this was, or further complexity to the fact that Wayne Bogas refers to this as a typical vihara form. So when he says that, for this kind of form, he is referring to something like this. Yeah? So there's a vihan and a mosque. Both are in Singgora. So if you go to Songkla or Singgora, you have this mosque, and then you have Wat Po. So you have this kind of resonance, right? The same building form used simultaneously. So I think looking at this would remove all our surprise about the translation of forms across religion. And you have, in closing, I want to end with this case, which to me is very interesting. This is a re-vernacularization, and understood in what is today seen as specifically Kelantan Malay, right? Of a form that was originally not even a mosque, but it is then remade to resemble the kind of mosque that in fact has connections back to the old vihara form that Malays, when they were Buddhists, would have used across the Straits region. Yeah, this kind of form. And that the further complication is this form is not Indian, yeah? It is local. And it is shared also with the Siamese and the Khmer's. Now, so what happened here is that originally this was a balai penghadapan for particular small minor palace. It was bought by the community in 1958. They converted it. Some of you know this case, right? Converted it into a surau. So at first the surau looks like this, quite prosaic. And then it was renovated in the years 2008 to 2009. And they added a pemele and then added these magnificent panel work. And so now it becomes vernacularized Malay Kelantanese, right? Quite interesting. So it's possible, therefore, for this kind of structure to achieve many different resonances. Many different resonances within, when they circulate in different contexts, like today, right? The preference is not to see it this way, so perhaps this is seen as too alien, but if you make it wood with panel work like that, I hope you get my message here. The idea of how it's dressed, these forms that are actually very old but forgotten. These are all in Malacca, right? There's this form, in wood or in brick, right? So they give off a different understanding or misunderstanding just by the change in material when in fact the typology is similar. And perhaps that's one way to end with this, right? So Brunei has the issue of which would look more like a mosque. So of course when they rebuilt the mosque in this form, this is the perfect way to end. Because when they built the mosque, they saw it fit to actually include this pavilion with all the sulur bayung, but not a mustaka. They added the royal emblem of Brunei to a pavilion on a boat in concrete. Yeah, a boat, a barge that those of us familiar with Kelantan and Terengganu boats, royal barges, will be very familiar with. Yeah, so they added this in front of the mosque, which I felt was the most remarkable juxtaposition, pointing to the topic that we were talking about today. It's not the mosque, but it could well have been the form of the original mosque. But this form is used for pavilions, for mimbars, and for mosques. With that, that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.